Welcome back to my channel. Before we begin this, what is bound to be a rant video, I'm gonna have like a little story time, a little like blast to the past. So the first book series that I really got into, even more than Harry Potter, was Twilight. And I was like 12 or 13 when I started to read it, and I never loved something so much. I read these books so fast, and those later books were ginormous, and I would read them in like 2 days. I had posters in my room. I saw the first movie 3 times in theaters. I had a poster in my locker. I was in love with Robert Pattinson, who played Edward, who I still have like a soft spot in my heart for. Really cemented my love for reading. I don't own those books anymore, and I haven't read anything in those books for like 10 years. Oh my God. But I am well aware that on a craft level, those books are terrible. But whenever I defend them, because I have been known to do so, it is because yes, they're not well written, her editor did her dirty, but on a story level, even if there are things that don't make sense, there is something compelling about those characters or the dynamic between Bella and Edward. There are things there that can capture people's imagination. And obviously it did, because it was a phenomenon. That being said, when I read The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, I had this like sudden epiphany that I am the person on the outside looking at people who love this book thinking, what is wrong with you? And I had to remind myself, it was really the only way I could finish it, that okay, there are elements here that are kind of interesting and are a little compelling, and just because it's not written well, some people just don't care. Some people are too young to care. Some people don't notice. And those interesting components are enough to carry a lot of people through a book like this. Point is, this book is really bad, and we're gonna talk about it. I knew this book was kind of controversial, but I also heard that A Court of Thorns and Roses was controversial. And I will link those videos below. I love those books, and they are, although especially the first one has its flaws, really well done and really well written. So when I went into this, I was like, maybe it will be something like that. Within like the first page, I knew things were not gonna go my way. So this non-spoiler part is going to be extremely brief. Should you read this book? If you're under 17 and not into reading, and or if you're just not very well versed in fantasy, then yeah, maybe you can get into it. If you are at all an avid reader, and I think especially if you're a writer, it was borderline unreadable. So, but you know, do whatever you want. Let's get into spoilers, and I'm just gonna go in with the assumption that you have already read The Cruel Prince or do not care, because I don't really want to go over scene by scene or the entire plot, because that will just be painful for me. Okay, actually, let's start with the cover. So the thing on top of, like, I've just heard about this book. Other than that, there was fairies. I didn't know what it was about, but I bought it because I really liked this cover. I love the stark white. I love kind of the creepy branches that crawl across the page. I love the title, The Cruel Prince. There's conflict within that title. And you know there's a prince, you know he's cruel, and you know he's probably cruel to the protagonist. And like that alone is pretty compelling. And Leah Bardugo, who is the author of the Grisha trilogy and Six of Crows, she gives her little quote at the top, lush, dangerous, a dark jewel of a book. I'm like, ooh, lush and dark and dangerous? That little snippet is better written than the majority of this book. I'm not over exaggerating. Talk about the cover. This is when I knew something was a little off. I will insert a photo if the camera isn't picking this up super well, but do you see this like chapter head? How that just looks very childlike, whimsical, like a little girl drew it in her journal. It's cute. I'm not saying that it's bad, it just did not fit the vibe that I thought the cover was giving me. And you might be like, girl, you're nitpicking. I know. I knew immediately something was up. Something wasn't jiving. And I was hoping whoever on the editorial end just kind of, they didn't get the vibe right. So another thing, the majority of this book is in first person, as to be expected with 99% of YA books, especially fantasy YA. There is a bit of a trend, if there is a prologue and an epilogue, that the prologue and epilogue will be written in third person. You know, I think it's like a little bit of like symmetry. This prologue is written in first person. The majority of the book is in first, and then the epilogue is also in first person. And it's like, okay, then why did the prologue have to be in third person? What does that do for the book to have it be in third person? If you're going to have 99% of the book in first, then just keep the prologue in first. There literally was no reason that it had to be in third. Ugh, and that prologue seemed like it was supposed to be really emotional or powerful, and like it kind of inherently is because children are watching their parents be killed, but we don't know anything about these children or the murderer or their parents. So you're just like, this isn't gruesome and wrong, but it's not particularly emotional. That's basically the book in a nutshell. The first climax of the book, when all the princes and princesses and the king, basically everyone gets murdered or commits suicide during that coronation when they're supposed to crown a new king, and the prince, one of the brothers, comes, kills the other prince, and then starts killing the other siblings. And you can tell that this Holly Black wanted to make that like a red wedding moment, where it is just so shocking and the bloodshed is so brutal, and it piqued my interest. That point of the book onwards was a lot easier to read than anything beforehand, because it was like, well, at least now there's conflict and things are happening. But that particular moment, and it wasn't handled very well, because you didn't know who any of these people are, other than the prince who was supposed to be coronated but got killed by his brother, Dane or Bane, something like that. The one who hired Jude to be his spy. Obviously, we know him because Jude interacted with him. And the younger brother, Cardan, because Jude and Cardan have interacted. But the rest of them, there are 3 other siblings, and then the king. We know virtually nothing about any of them. If they didn't have their titles in front of their names, I would have no idea they were a part of the royal family. That is how little we get to know those characters. There's not a lot of emotion behind it. It's not as impactful as it could have been, because I don't know who these people are. I don't know why I should care about them. And ultimately, it's kind of shocking because there's so much bloodshed, but it's not that like punch you can tell she was trying to go for. It's a shame, because it's kind of a cool idea to have all these princes and princesses die because this like really selfish brother wants to be crowned instead, and it's in front of literally the entire kingdom and all these other clans that are coming in. Interesting. Not executed particularly well. So I have a section of the book bookmarked. It was this section that I almost considered just putting the book down and never picking it up again and potentially burning it, because it was so bad. Something this book is trying to do, and I don't know why, and I don't know who told her that this is a good idea, and this could be a personal thing, to be fair. I hate when contemporary and fantasy try to mix. And I know I say that as like someone who loved Twilight, which like 1, I was 13, and 2, Twilight is technically supernatural, and those category distinctions do make a difference. This is actually trying to mix like hard fantasy, but like goblins and fairies and living in a fantastical world and magic and swords and knighthood with like literally 2018 modern society. And it is horrible. And every time, and she also, heated. In this section alone, so Jude, her twin sister, her older half fairy sister, Vivi, is taking them to the human mall. Vivi picks stalks of ragwort that grow near the water troughs. After finding 3 that meet her specifications, she lifts the first and blows on it, saying, "Steed, rise and bear us where I command." And then she throws them, and they turn into horse-like creatures that can travel on land and fly. And that's what takes them from the fairy world to the mall, like an actual mall. This is how the magic system is, as in there are no rules. And if you've seen any of my past book reviews, I love rules with magic. They don't have to be hyper specific like they are with something like Name of the Wind, but I like something that keeps the magic and people who possess magic grounded. Like she literally just says things, and it's not in another language. There's nothing behind it. Like she just says it, and then they turn into magical flying steeds. What? Fairies are so overpowered. How can humans possibly exist? If you're a human in a fairy world, you're a second-class citizen. How have fairies not conquered the earth, considering they can just use magic willy-nilly and literally create modes of transportation, or they can control you. If they get to eat fairy juice, you're drugged. And there's no explanation for why fairies have to remain hidden, why they're so secretive, why they're so sneaky. They just are. Again, why are you not rulers of the world? Why aren't the entire human race enslaved? You are all powerful. You can live longer than humans. You think humans are nasty and use them as serfs, and you have magic. It's not like this girl that just did that trained her magical ability or went to any sort of magic school to hone in this craft. She literally just said it and blew the radiqueet, and then it happened. It's okay, if this girl can do that, imagine a general or somebody who was a master. I'm hurting my voice. I'm getting so upset. Someone should have pointed this out. Someone should have said to Holly, what is the magic system? Maybe you should have one. It's upsetting. So they get to this mall. This author uses actual name brands throughout this book. So right away they say, we strut through the JCPenney as though we're the most dangerous things around. At one point it talks about a CVS store. At another point it talks about the Apple store. And at another point, a girl mentions Coachella. Every time I read a name brand like that, it was poking a needle in my eye and just having to live with the blood. It just feels so tacky. Just putting in these name brands, date your book immediately. Coachella may not be around in 2 years, you know? Are you okay? It's just a way to date your book and keep it from being timeless and classic or classy. Oh, it just irks me to the high heavens. And then Vivi takes her sisters around the mall, and it's would it really have been more work to be we go into the bland department store we own the place? Why do you have to use its name? And then Vivi's I want you to meet my girlfriend, and it's ooh, Holly, you are so edgy and hip with the kids nowadays. So Jude is talking with Vivi's girlfriend, Heather, and Jude asks, did she tell you anything about our family? Heather sighs, no, our dad is really conservative, I say. Does he even know Vivi is bi? Heather asks, astonished. Am I crazy? Who talks like that? I guarantee you, I know nothing about Holly Black other than she wrote this book. I bet Holly Black is in her mid-30s and typed out that scene and was oh, this Generation X kids are gonna be so into this and they're gonna think I'm so cool and edgy and oh, that's so relatable. And this is supposed to be in a fantasy book. I think that's what just gets me above all else. But we're not done with this scene yet. So then they're done talking to the girlfriend. Before we leave, we stop by CVS and I pick up tampons. Every time I buy them, it's a reminder that while the folk look like us, they are a species apart. I know what you're wondering. No, they don't bleed once a month. Yes, they do bleed. Annually, sometimes less frequently than that. Yes, they have solutions, padding mostly, and yes, those solutions suck. Yes, everything about it is embarrassing. Okay, first of all, I was not wondering. Second of all, again, I could just feel this Holly black lady thinking that she's being so cool by talking about periods in her young adult book. Like, my eyes could not roll farther back in my skull. The most egregious thing about what I just read is that Jude, this character, continuously breaks the fourth wall, but it's not consistent. By midway to the end of this book, she is no longer breaking it. However, here where it's like, I know what you're wondering. Who's the you? Who are you talking to? There's a chapter in there that's only a page or two long where she's speaking directly to the audience and just being like, I need to tell you about some things that happened to me in the past. Who are you talking to? Why are you doing this? But then it stops. And it's just things like that where this book feels haphazardly thrown together. Nobody's asking any deeper questions like, what about the magic system? Why is Jude talking to somebody in the second person? It's a wild time. And then the end of this section. This section that I've read to you guys is ridiculous. So Jude and her sisters are heading towards the parking lot. Guy our age touches my arm. Hey, sweetheart. I saw you before and I was just wondering. I am turning before I can think. My fist cracking into his jaw. My booted foot hits his gut as he falls, rolling him over the pavement. The mortals standing around him are staring at me in horror. What do you mean the mortals? You're a mortal. I think he was flirting with me. I don't get what how I'm supposed to feel about Jude. On one hand, I'm sympathetic towards her because she was like taken away from her family and she's raised by these strangers in a land where she's basically a second-class citizen. But she's a horrible person and extremely violent. And that part is self-aware. Jude talks about it as the book goes on, like, wow, I love violence. I love bloodshed. I love figuring out solutions using swords and threats and terror and power over people. So there is something self-aware about the fact that Jude is a monster. So that part, at least, is like kind of well done. The most interesting character in the book by far is Cardan. Cardan. And he's the youngest prince. He's the one that you initially think is the cruel prince because he and his friends are horrible to Jude and her sister. But it turns out that he's not as cruel as you originally think. He has like a sad backstory. He has very cruel things done to him. He won't do anything violent. And there's something about him that you just can't quite pin down. Oh, part of the reason he's so angry with Jude and like picks on Jude all the time is because he's extremely attracted to her, which like, of course, but also like, that's the best part of the book. He was such a tricky character to pin down, which made him the most compelling, which makes him by far the most interesting. So if people and young teens, if the youth are reading this book and are getting really into it because they really like Cardan and are like into the relationship between him and Jude, I kind of get it. That was the most interesting thing for me. I didn't care about who was becoming king because I didn't really care about the fairy world because the fairy world was a wreck. The ending is definitely interesting, having Cardan tricked into being on the throne and hopefully trying to keep him there until her little brother, who is full fairy and whisked off into the human world, is old enough to come back. It's interesting. I am mildly compelled. Like, ooh, I wonder what happens. Do I want to read The Wicked King? No, God, no. I don't want to subject myself to any more of that. I am kind of interested in what happens. It's just so funny. Cardan is just, throughout the book, painted as this horrible person. But by the end of it, I'm just like, Jude doesn't deserve him. Jude's a monster. And so that kind of dynamic is interesting. Like, you're sympathetic to Jude. You think Cardan's the horrible person. By the end of it, Cardan's the like redeemable character and Jude's the monster. The political stuff in here makes no sense. It's hyper simplistic. A kid in elementary school can understand the politics in here. It's ridiculous, and it's kind of glossed over as like, fairies are just so whimsical and just don't care about this kind of stuff. And it's like, no, I think you just don't care about this kind of stuff. Like, you want the impact of something like Game of Thrones without actually putting in the work that an author has to put in to achieve that. One of the most frustrating reading experiences of my life. Hi guys, Claire from the future popping in to let you guys know about a little site called Book Depository. So if you, for some reason, are still compelled to read The Cruel Prince for yourself, but you don't want to pay Barnes & Noble prices for it, definitely check out my link for Book Depository in the description below, because you can get books including newer releases for discounted prices and, best part, free shipping worldwide. I will have a link below directly towards The Cruel Prince in paperback, which last time I checked was for $8.99, not the $12.99 that it is in stores. And for the site in general, in case you want literally anything else, if you do use those links, that gives me a very small commission and costs you nothing extra. So I appreciate that so much if you do, and let's get to the end of this video. If you have read this book, please leave a comment down below, especially if you liked it. Tell me why. But if you didn't like it, also tell me why. Give this video a thumbs up, it really helps me out, and subscribe so you don't miss any content like this in the future, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.